Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're witnessing an absolutely massive, simultaneous collision of geopolitics, climate, and technology that is fundamentally reshaping our world. We aren't just looking at isolated events anymore. We are looking at an incredibly interconnected convergence. And to really understand it, we have to look at the data.
So let's dive right into this. What do a localized military conflict in a Middle Eastern strait, a weather pattern out in the Pacific Ocean, and the invisible digital infrastructure of artificial intelligence that we literally use every single day have in common? On the surface, they seem completely unrelated, right? But as you're going to see, they are all feeding into a single, massive, global feedback loop.
Well, the spark for this whole convergence really started with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It's this incredibly narrow, 33-kilometer-wide maritime choke point. The World Bank actually put out a warning that disrupting this single waterway is so severe it could potentially push 45 million additional people into acute hunger by mid-2026. 45 million! When you look at the global hotspots, it becomes glaringly clear just how widespread this vulnerability truly is.
And here's why. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, along with research from FarmDoc Daily, roughly one-third, so 33% of the entire global seaborne fertilizer trade moves right through that single narrow choke point. Add to that a quarter of the global seaborne oil trade. Think about that. When you bottleneck fertilizer and energy at the exact same time, you are essentially strangling the global food supply.
Zooming in locally on the Gulf Cooperation Council nations, the fallout is immediate. A recent report from Agrobericht and Beitland details how these countries have actually been forced into full-on emergency protocols. With maritime routes totally paralyzed by companies pulling war risk insurance, they are desperately rerouting to Red Sea ports and scaling up a massively expensive expansion of air freight just to bring in perishables. In places like Bahrain and Kuwait, this has already caused a 30 to 100% cost increase for basic fresh meat and fish. That is a real game changer for everyday life.
But what's truly terrifying is how this local bottleneck explodes onto the global macroeconomic stage. Just looking at World Bank food and nutrition security data, we see that the price of urea, which is an absolutely critical nitrogen fertilizer, skyrocketed by nearly 46% in just one single month, between February and March of 2026.
So, the key takeaway here is that this isn't just a minor inconvenience, it is a structural shock. Researchers Hinz and colleagues pointed out in a recent study that standard trade models completely underestimate this kind of impact. Why? Because energy disruptions cascade directly into chemical and fertilizer production, which then slams right into food prices. And let's be real, this burden doesn't fall equally. It disproportionately hammers the world's poorest nations in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, who rely heavily on these exact imports just to grow their own crops.
Which brings us to a terrifying multiplier effect. Because you have to ask yourself, how exactly are farmers supposed to cope with skyrocketing fertilizer costs and missing agricultural inputs when the climate itself is actively working against them?
Enter El Niño. In a really eye-opening interview with France 24, Gareth Redmond-King from the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit captured this perfectly. He warned that El Niño is essentially turbocharging climate change. To use his exact words, it's like we're in a very hot room and somebody decides to turn on the heating and light the fire. We are pouring extra heat into a system that's already warmed by 1.4 degrees. This brings insane storms to some areas and brutal, severe heat to others, just totally decimating already vulnerable harvests.
And the real-world agricultural fallout from this is undeniable. If we check the World Bank's early 2026 data, food inflation exceeded 5% in roughly 50 different countries. We are witnessing a simultaneous breaking of the supply chain and a massive suppression of global crop yields. It's like getting hit from both sides.
But wait, the story doesn't end there. While our climate heats up and global supply chains fracture, there is a third, almost invisible weight compounding these crises. What is quietly, yet massively, draining our power grids and our freshwater reserves at the exact same time?
The answer? Artificial intelligence. The immense, rapidly scaling resource drain of AI data centers is staggering. According to the International Energy Agency, global data centers, crypto, and AI consumed 460 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2022. By 2026, that number is projected to double. To put that into perspective for you, that is roughly equal to the entire electricity consumption of Japan. Just let that sink in for a second.
And the way this energy scales is unlike anything we've ever seen.
AI workloads are completely different from traditional cloud computing. While conventional data centers scale their energy linearly with user traffic, AI compute scales super exponentially. It requires extreme power density. In fact, according to research published in the MDPI journal, in tech hubs like Ireland, data centers are already consuming a staggering 16% of the country's total grid capacity. 16%.
But massive power draw is really only half the equation. There's also the AI water footprint. Research by Zhao and colleagues in the journal Nature Sustainability breaks down this water energy nexus beautifully. You might just think of water being used to cool the servers directly, but their research shows the indirect water usage, meaning the water required simply to generate the massive amounts of electricity these AI servers demand makes up 71% of AI's total water footprint.
All of this creates an immense environmental strain. We are seeing explosive AI infrastructure expansion, often in areas that are already facing higher climate impacts, like the southern United States. This expansion seriously perturbs local water balances. So picture this. Just as El Niño triggers extreme heat waves and droughts, forcing farmers to desperately need water to save their crops, utility companies are forced into an impossible choice. Do we route our dwindling water supplies to agriculture, or do we use it to keep the data centers from overheating?
When we pull back, we can finally see the full architecture of this crisis. It is a massive, cascading bottleneck. It begins with geopolitical blockades in the Strait of Hormuz, spiking fertilizer and energy costs. That directly collides with El Niño supercharging global heat and crop failures, exactly when farming inputs are most expensive. And compounding it all, unchecked AI expansion aggressively drains the very water and grid capacity needed to keep our food and energy systems afloat. They are tightly intertwined into a single, compounding global event.
Which leaves us with an absolutely critical thought to take away from all this data. As we relentlessly advance our technology, building incredible machines to theoretically solve our most complex problems, are we simultaneously running out of the very real-world resources, the food, the water, and the energy needed to survive them? It's a trade-off we can no longer afford to ignore. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it helped connect the dots for you. Catch you next time.
Getting to the heart of the matter isn't always easy, but here we always look for the essence. Thank you for your time and your curiosity. Subscribe for more answers, and as always, thanks for watching.